All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in today's webinar using ChatGPT to optimize SaaS workflows. I'm very excited to be joined in today's webinar. I'm going to give a quick introduction and then hand it over to Shanif to get started. So first I want to mention we're partnered today with Locusive. Locusive helps companies connect their internal data and third-party tools like Salesforce or Google Drive to ChatGPT. So lets their customers and employees chat with their data, letting them find answers, documents, and resources in just a few seconds without hallucinations and with citations to the original source material. So today's presenter is Shanif Dahani. He is a ChatGPT consultant with a background in software development and data science. He currently helps businesses understand and build systems that connect their internal and proprietary systems to ChatGPT, enabling internal employees, customers, and other stakeholders to reap the benefits of using large language models on their own data. He's built large machine learning, analytics, software systems at large companies like Twitter and Booz Allen, smaller startups like Apteo, where he was the founder, and Tap Commerce, which was one of the world's first mobile advertising platform. So very excited to have you kick it off whenever you're ready. Thanks.
Cool. Well, thank you, Howard, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. So really quickly, before we even get started, I'm not sure if I can share my webcam, but hopefully you'll see my smiling face here, and just really quickly tell you a little bit about myself and sort of convince you that, hey, at least I'm not making everything up as I'm going. So my name is Shanif, as Howard says, and I'm a data geek by training. I've been doing software engineering for like 20 years and machine learning and AI. A couple of relevant things that might be useful just to know. I was the founding engineer and head of analytics at a company called Tap Commerce, which was one of the first mobile advertising platforms. We built a system that handled about 1 million ad requests a second. We built a lot of that technology as well as the bidding strategies using AI. We sold it to Twitter, so I worked at Twitter for a few years working on, unfortunately, predicting, what people would click on what ads. So interesting technology, but I decided to move on and started a company called Apteo, which was doing AI for e-commerce. And now what I'm doing is at Locusive is basically helping people connect their data to ChatGPT. And so we are basically building software that allows people to use ChatGPT on their private data, their proprietary information. And I've worked with a lot of companies, both within services as well as SaaS and technology, to try to understand what it is that they'd like ChatGPT to do. And I've learned a lot about the different processes that they want to implement. Some of the applications I've built so far, a Slack bot to help people answer their questions by connecting their third-party tools, batch workflows that can use ChatGPT to categorize millions and millions of user-generated content, autonomous agents and bots that act sort of like virtual assistants. So hopefully this convinces you, hey, look, like the next 15, 20, 25 minutes won't be a total waste of your time. I'm going to try to be efficient and just walk through what it means to use ChatGPT in SaaS workflows. And so really quickly, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I'll give you a quick overview of ChatGPT and large language models, just so we have a little bit of groundwork in place. And then I'll talk about SaaS workflows and how to optimize them. I'll go into, what the heck is even a SaaS workflow? How do you think about them? How do I think about them? And maybe some of the things that you can do to optimize them with ChatGPT. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about what should you be thinking about if you actually want to use ChatGPT in your own applications. And then we'll jump into any questions if you have any at the end. If not, feel free to ask them. I'm not sure if I can see them, but feel free to ask chat questions in the middle of the presentation, and I'll try to get to them once I see them. Now, my hope is this won't take too long. My aim is generally to hit about a 30-minute presentation because I know people start to nod off after that, but we'll see how it goes. And so let's just jump right in. All right, so let's talk about what actually is ChatGPT. Now, I'm sure you guys have used it. You know what it is. That's probably why you're here. But I just wanted to give a quick overview of what it actually is. And I wanted to present it within the context of AI as a whole, because you've probably heard the term AI thrown around a lot over the past couple of months. Now, AI is basically just any sort of application of computing power or robotics to perform smart or intelligent tasks that could be useful for humans. Within that context of AI, you've got generative AI, which is the subsection of AI that basically works towards producing content. This could be images, this could be text like ChatGPT, could even be audio. Within the world of generative AI, you've got foundation models. These are sort of large models that are trained on lots and lots of data in sort of what's called an unsupervised way. They set up the foundation for building more interesting things like large language models. And then finally, ChatGPT, which is a fine-tuned model that works really well for chatting and getting instructions and chatting with the end user. And so you've probably seen how it works, but the one thing I want to make sure that everybody understands is what ChatGPT is really doing is it's taking your prompt from the user, and it's trying to predict the next set of words that should come next. Now, this might sound a little bit funny. It's trying to predict words, but essentially that's what it's doing. It's been trained on a lot of data from the internet, and it understands, given this set of words or this paragraph, these set of words are most likely to come next. And so what it does when you send in a prompt is that it tries to take your prompt as well as any contextual information like historical messages between you and itself, and it tries to predict what the next few words should be. And then once it predicts those words, it says, okay, does this constitute a sufficient response? Am I done? And if it is done, then it'll give you the final answer. And if it's not done, it just takes what it predicted, feeds that back into itself, and it keeps predicting words and outputting them until it has what it considers to be a reasonable answer to your question. So like most other machine learning applications, this is a prediction machine. It just happens to predict words, and it does it quite well. So we think that it's sort of reasoning or thinking. Now, what are some of the things that I've seen people use this for? Well, you can use it to get answers quickly. This is perhaps the most popular way of using ChatGPT. It's almost like a competitor to search engines where you type in your question, and rather than having to go through and get a bunch of text links that you have to search for, it just gives you your answer right away. You can also use it for generating content. A lot of people I've talked to say, hey, I use it to write my blog posts or update my profile or write my emails. And then just like generating content, you can use it to edit content. So it's really good at coming up with blogs, coming up with text-based articles, things like that, where it sort of produces information in a fact-based way. And one of the things that I specialize in is just building intelligent applications on top of it. It's a really good way to intelligently automate a lot of things that we could never automate before. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this at the end of the conversation, but I wanted to quickly illustrate what it looks like and what it means to actually do some of these things. So let's talk about the most popular use case I mentioned, getting answers quickly. Well, you can easily go to ChatGPT's website and you can ask it a quick question, and then it'll spit out an answer for you. There's a few benefits, obviously, to this. You chat directly with the website. It gets a lot of information because it was trained on everything in the world and the internet. It's able to sort of have a lot of information about a lot of different things. And so it acts as a good search engine. But there are times where it won't know the answer to your question. And rather than saying, hey, I don't know, it's going to make something up. And this is what's called a hallucination. And so you do have to be a little bit careful about this as you use this for business context. The idea behind being a prediction machine is it's trying to, and a fine-tuned prediction machine, which tries to be a good conversationalist. The downside of this is that it's going to spit out a bunch of things that just try to make you happy, because that's what it's trying to do. It doesn't really know what it doesn't know. It's not like ChatGPT stores a bunch of information in a database somewhere about all of the facts in the world. What it's trying to do is predict the next set of words, and it's optimized to make you happy. And so it's likely that you're going to come across something that just doesn't make sense or is just not true. And that's what's known as a hallucination. But in general, it's quite good at answering your questions. And as I mentioned, it's also good at editing and generating content. Now, one of my friends is a real estate agent, and she needs to constantly write listings about properties. And this kind of takes a lot of time. And so what her and her company have started doing is feeding information about each property into ChatGPT, for example, the total number of bedrooms, total number of bathrooms, and then asking it to generate a description. And it does a pretty good job of that. And you can apply this to anything. You can apply this to emails, you can apply this to blog posts or articles. It's quite good at coming up with a description of something. And while this is sort of really useful, the one area where it might not be so useful is that it doesn't have a ton of personality when you ask it to write something. So while it can come up with something that sounds pretty good and has a really nice, appealing tone to it, it will sound a little bit generic. It could sound a little bit generic, and it might lack a little bit of personality. Now, you can use it to edit itself and update the way that it sounds, but if you're just going to produce a quick blog post or a quick piece of content using ChatGPT, just be aware that the tone it takes sounds a little bit robotic and a little bit fake. So you might need to play around with it a little bit. But like I said, great for generating content. So I wanted to give a quick overview of how I started using it, just so you can get a sense for myself as a software engineer, how is it affecting my day-to-day? And then once we talk about that, we can start talking about how do you use this in other SaaS workflows. Well, for me, I actually started by installing something that might not even be related to ChatGPT. It's called Copilot. And this is a plugin for my programming tools. And that allows me to automatically generate code a lot more easily and a lot faster than what I had before I was using Copilot. So I actually started using it right within my existing workflow. As a programmer or a coder, I have to code sometimes 10 or 12 hours a day. And I would say that this particular tool, this Copilot tool, saves me something like 3 to 5 hours a week. Now, while this is really good by itself, I did start using ChatGPT specifically for larger code files. So Copilot is really good for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 lines of code at a time. But one thing I can do with ChatGPT is I can basically copy and paste, anywhere from a few hundred to 1,000 lines of code, and then say, hey, I need you to help me refactor this code or change it or add this feature or debug it for me. And the really interesting thing about ChatGPT is because it's been trained on the internet and there's a whole lot of code out there on the internet, it actually does quite a good job of helping me come up with larger code files of code or debugging. And this saves me another sort of 2 to 4 hours a week, I would guesstimate. Then I started using it to actually take my code and push it out to the cloud. If you've never had to do this before, count yourself lucky, because there are a lot of problems when you push code out to the cloud. It's one of those things where anything and everything can go wrong. But when you've got a tool like ChatGPT at your disposal, you can start to work with it back and forth to answer questions about, hey, what's the best process for this? Or how do I do this? Or how do I make sure that my users can hit my internet URL? So I started doing that, and then I started building new apps on top of it. And this is sort of where I spend my time today, doing a lot of API work. But I eventually always come back to using it for my personal account as well. So we're planning a trip to Yosemite, myself and my family, and I actually use it to come up with a good plan for 2 to 3 days there. So this gives you a sense for somebody who was new and had never used a large language model before, how I sort of came into it a bit of a skeptic, but then I started sort of dipping my toes, getting familiar with it, and then using it to improve my workflow. And that's essentially what we're going to be talking about when we're talking about SaaS workflows and ChatGPT. There are a few different ways to think about workflows. There is your employees. What is a workflow for your employees? Well, for me, it is taking some problem that I need to automate with code, creating that, and then pushing it up to the cloud and debugging it, making sure this all works. But for a marketer, it could look totally different. It could look like researching a particular topic, doing the keyword research for that topic, and then coming out with a blog post that optimizes for those keywords. Or for a customer success manager, it could look like understanding what the problem that they're solving is for a particular customer, diving into a database, diving into product documentation, and then coming back with a response. And so a SaaS workflow, what I'll spend the majority of my time talking about today is how does this affect employees? But at the end, I'll also talk about how can you improve your existing SaaS app to make those workflows better, to make it easier for your users to come in and have a better sense for what's going on within your application. So let's just talk really quickly about maybe 3 example types of people within a SaaS organization and how they can start to use ChatGPT. Today, I'll be focusing on just examples, and I'll be focusing on software engineers, how ChatGPT might be able to help them, customer success managers or customer support managers. You can sort of take how you want to use the word CSM and apply it to your use case. I'll be talking about both. And then how sales and marketing professionals can use ChatGPT. Now, really quickly, let's just talk about maybe what does a day in the life look like for these people. I already talked about myself as a software engineer. Let's talk a little bit about CSMs. They might be on a chatbot all day, or they might be surfacing phone calls or emails, and frequently they have to interact with a particular customer or a particular issue. So they're doing a lot of research, they're doing a lot of presentations. If you're talking more about customer success, then you're talking about customer support. You might be doing QBRs, quarterly business meetings, or quarterly business reviews to make sure that your customers are getting the most out of your tool. And so it's a lot of understanding the products that you're offering, understanding the customers, and then understanding how you can best communicate with them to accomplish a goal. And then let's talk a little bit about sales and marketing professionals. Obviously, the goals of these particular roles are to bring in business. Marketing might be more focused on inbound or more focused on getting prospects, whereas sales might be focused more on closing deals. In both cases, you are sort of working on a process to get people in the door, get them educated about your product, and then get them closed. In both cases, you're working on a process. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about as we talk about SaaS workflows. What are some of the processes that you go through, and how do you improve those processes using ChatGPT? So I'll just start with software engineers. It's a really good use case because I think that ChatGPT might be extremely helpful for software engineers compared to maybe some other roles. Now, one thing I mentioned was I use ChatGPT to generate code. This is actually a screenshot of one of my interactions with it on the website. I was trying to figure out sort of something that was a little bit complicated, and I was using its help to help me get through sort of a large Java class file. This, like I said, has saved me a lot of time. Now you can do this on the website, or you can do it within your IDE or your code tools. Whatever it is that makes sense for you, you can start to write code. And you can actually start to write code even if you're not a software engineer. Let's say you're a small business owner. I'm working with one customer now who actually started using ChatGPT to come up with a code file that does what he needs. Now, he eventually brought me in because he wanted to make it sort of more robust and put it up on the cloud. But you can actually do a lot of those things with ChatGPT yourself. If you are building a large enterprise application or a large app that you want to be able to figure out, how do I actually make this thing work? Just go and ask ChatGPT and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Please help me get started. And then you can easily copy the code that it provides and then run it and actually debug it. They even rolled out a new what's called code interpreter recently, which is where they can run the code itself right there on the website and give you the outputs. Now, this might be good for something like a data science task or an analytics task, but it could also be useful at debugging things. Now, what else can software engineers use ChatGPT for? I've used it a lot to optimize things and for debugging. I'm going through actually right before this call, I was trying to debug a problem that I'm having, and I was using ChatGPT to help me solve that problem. So it's really good for figuring out things that might have taken a lot of mental power before. And it's also really good for boring things, but necessary things like writing tests. Like I said, if you're applying this to your workflows, this can save you hours per week. You just sort of need to take a look at what it is that you're working on throughout the day, and then figure out, hey, look, like I can probably offload some of this to ChatGPT. And you can easily go to the website and ask it what you need. And that's how I would recommend getting started in any use case, but particularly for software engineers. All right, so let's talk about a different use case now, CSMs. We can call these customer support or customer success. I've actually worked with one company before, and we use ChatGPT to help create a list of data, we use ChatGPT to analyze data in a way that CSMs could basically create reports for their quarterly business reviews for their customers. And the idea was that these customers were e-commerce merchants, and they needed to have a better idea of how their products were selling and what was doing really well and what wasn't doing well. And so we used ChatGPT to come up with categorizations for product reviews. And then these CSMs were able to take those categorizations and bring them to the customer. and say, hey, you know, the majority of the people who like your product like it because it's stylish or it fits well. Or the majority of the people who don't like your product like it because maybe it expires too early or it's too small. So depending on the type of data you have, if you've got a strong customer support or customer success team, you can actually start to have ChatGPT analyze some of that data and produce reports for you. And this might accelerate the productivity of your CSM teams. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about customer support. One of the things I'm seeing that's coming up quite frequently is new chatbots that are sort of hooked up to product documentation or Q&As or FAQs. And a lot of times people are using these chatbots to let people answer their own questions. But then if they can't answer those questions, it gets escalated to a human being. Now, the interesting thing about this is when a question gets to a human being, they are able to see all of the different things that the person tried to do with the help of ChatGPT before they have to start answering the question. And this allows them to get a better sense for what's going on and what they need to get done. It also allows them to find answers to questions much more quickly. So for example, if you've got a CSM team, let's say customer support team, who's hooked up into your backend, you might be able to ask that backend about a question that your user, that your customer is asking you. And instead of having to wade through a bunch of information for 3 or 4 minutes, you can ask a quick bot, and then that bot might come back to you with an answer in 30 seconds. So there's a few different things to think about when you're talking about customer support. The more that you integrate your existing data and the more that you provide self-service tools for your customer support team, the faster they can answer customer support questions. And one other interesting thing that you can do with this is you can actually start to identify possible areas for upselling your existing customers. If you plug in ChatGPT to the existing tools that you've got, for example, maybe a CRM like Salesforce that keeps track of what tools your customers have plugged into, or even other tools like a database, you can actually start to identify areas where ChatGPT can provide suggestions to your CSMs for upselling opportunities. Now, this requires a little bit more work. It does require you to build in more tools rather than just using the ChatGPT website. But these are just some opportunities where you can start to take something that might be considered a cost center, for example, customer support, and start to turn it into more of a revenue generation tool by allowing your customer support team to have access to the right tools at the right time. All right, so now let's finish off the workflow piece by talking about sales and marketing. This is probably the area where most businesses are excited because it represents new revenue generation opportunities. Well, this is sort of an area that's growing really quickly. It's still early days, but there's a few things I'm seeing right now which can make sales and marketing folks more productive. I think the obvious one to start with is basically email generation. You know, if you're doing a ton of cold calls or cold emails, you can start to, it's really hard to personalize those emails. But if you use ChatGPT, you can start to get a little bit more of an intelligent automation layer on top of creating personalized email content. You can do things like scraping a LinkedIn profile and asking for a personalized email and then putting that into your email tool and then just hitting send. If you're really good, you can actually start to wire this up as its own automatic application that just runs without a human in the loop. And so this is something that I'm seeing a lot of right now, where people are creating tools to automatically reach out to others, reach out to potential customers with personalized email ideas. And they're starting to do this now on social media as well with LinkedIn and Twitter. And so you can start to use ChatGPT to come up with highly personalized content without having to go through that same level of effort that you used to before. You can still do this manually, and a lot of people are doing this manually. And what ChatGPT gives you is the ability to do this with perhaps less mental effort or a little bit more efficiency than you were before, or you can automate this entirely and have a fully functioning automatic application running for you. All right, so that might be the, let's call it the outbound approach. What about marketing? What about folks who do a lot of content marketing? Well, just like we talked about how ChatGPT is really good at coming up with content, you can start to use it to come up with content marketing ideas. Some people are using it to actually write long form content like blogs and articles. I've had sort of mixed reactions to that. I think that a lot of the articles that people create might be optimized for SEO right now, but I think that that's probably going to start to diminish over time because a lot of these articles sort of feel a little bit polished, like too polished almost, and they don't feel as human as maybe some other articles that were written by a person, which means that they're probably going to start to get less interaction and engagement. Now, maybe that doesn't matter for something like a how-to guide, but it could matter for something that's a little bit more personal or trying to get more customers in the door. Regardless, you can start to use ChatGPT to provide outlines and content ideas, and this reduces a lot of the time that you spend in terms of the early stages of creating content. It can take a long time to think about what it is that you should be writing. It can take a long time to come up with an outline for a particular blog post or social media post. And the good thing about ChatGPT is it can provide you with those initial ideas and the initial structure of your content so that you can start to fill in the content yourself if you want, or you can just take the outline and feed it back into ChatGPT and have it write the whole article for you. Again, maybe not something I'd recommend right now, but certainly a possibility and certainly something that people are doing right now. So let's talk a little bit now about how your users can benefit from ChatGPT. We've talked a lot about how do your employees improve their workflows. Well, let's talk really quickly about how you as a SaaS app producer or engineer or product manager can improve your applications. One of the things that I've been starting to work on is creating a tool that lets apps plug in to ChatGPT with a chat interface. Now, you know, most apps today, most SaaS apps require you to go into a website or some other front-end tool or your app, click on a bunch of buttons, and get a response back. And this works really well for a lot of use cases. This might not work so well for things like dashboards or BI tools. And so not a lot, but certainly enough SaaS app producers now are reaching out and asking, hey, can we just let our users ask us a quick question on our chatbot, or can we hook our app up to like a Slack bot and let people just ask questions and then get answers that they might have had to require, previously pointing and clicking into our website? Can we just let them ask questions now? And that's certainly something you can do. ChatGPT provides an API, and if you hook up your chatbot or you build a chatbot that can then access ChatGPT's API, but also access your application's database or CRM, you can start to build this layer that connects your app's data to ChatGPT and allows your users to ask questions of it. And this is one prime example of this is by creating dashboards where you can just start chatting, and then ChatGPT will be used to provide an answer, maybe alongside some sort of visualization tool. I'm seeing a couple of apps come out now where they're basically creating business intelligence dashboards that allow you to chat and come up with your dashboards or your answers right away. And I suspect that this is sort of an area where we're going to start to see a lot of new apps come out where they're starting to allow users to ask questions of their data and then get quick answers back. And finally, one area that I'm really working a lot on myself is the world of what's called sort of an autonomous agent, or you can think of them as like a smarter assistant or a virtual assistant. The idea here is now, because ChatGPT is sort of this intelligent reasoning machine, it can start to make good decisions about things, and you can start to use those decisions to make better automations. And when you hook up something like that to a system that's got access to, let's say, your email and a search engine and the weather app, you can start to create these assistants that allow you to go through your day using one of these tools to assist you with common tasks. And I think this is a world that we're also going to start to see really grow in the next maybe 12 to 24 months. And the more that you can add this sort of automated capability or assistant capabilities to your own apps, I think the more that your users will appreciate your interfaces, and the more they're going to start to be able to use your app for more powerful things. Okay, so that sort of wraps up the workflow process. A lot of people, though, ask me, hey, look, like, how do I actually get started? A lot of people have maybe ideas of 10 or 15 things that ChatGPT can help them with. And I almost always recommend starting small. Try it out yourself, kind of like I did. Just go to the website and ask it a couple of quick questions. Get familiar with what it's good at and what it's not good at. Then once you've got a sense for what it can actually do for you, one of the things you can start to do is take a look at your own workflows and think about where it is that you're spending maybe an extra hour a day where you really shouldn't be. This is a good opportunity to find things that maybe you need to get done, but they're super tedious. Maybe they require a little bit of human intuition or human work. And you can start to automate these away with ChatGPT. And you can just use the website, or if you need to build an application, you can just build a very small proof of concept and see what that gets you. A lot of times you're going to get a really useful tool over the course of maybe a weekend. And by doing something that ties into a problem that you're already having, you're able to get a sense for how well does ChatGPT solve these problems, how well can you use this, and where is it applicable, not only in this problem, but in all the other problems in your business or all the other sales and revenue generating opportunities. So the point here is really start small, work quickly, don't invest a ton of time and resources, and the good thing is you don't really have to because ChatGPT is so simple to use. All right, so let's talk very quickly now about what it is to build apps on top of ChatGPT. And this is sort of the final section before we open it up to Q&A. So I want to make sure I'm cognizant of your time. So I won't spend too much time here, but I've been building apps on top of sort of every system out there for a long time now, years and years. But I've been building apps on top of ChatGPT for 4 or 5 months now. And I've come across sort of a couple of key considerations. There's a few things that work really well for building on top of ChatGPT. One, what I call chatting with your tools and documents. So this is something like where you maybe upload a PDF or a few files, and then you can start asking questions about ChatGPT, about those files. You can do this on ChatGPT now using their plugins, but sometimes you might want to be able to just have a record or just not have to upload your PDFs every single time you need to get questions from them. And so building an app that does this is a really prime example of how to use ChatGPT's API. You could also do things like generating an automatic process. So for example, I talked about, can you reach out to people automatically and send personalized emails? Well, if you build an app on top of ChatGPT, you absolutely can do that. Another area where I spend a lot of time is building internal search engines or document finders. Another cool thing about hooking up your docs and your third-party tools to ChatGPT is now you can start to use it to ask, hey, where does this document live? Or hey, I used this media file, in a campaign for an ad 5 weeks ago. I can't find it. Where is it located? And you can start to do things like building these internal search engines and tools. And then, like I said, you can add chat interfaces to your existing SaaS apps. These are all examples of what you can do while building on top of ChatGPT. A lot of these require you to plug in your own data and have your own tools. There's 3 things I want to very quickly go over if you are building your own apps when it comes to your own data. The first one is, how do you actually get ChatGPT to have access to your data? Well, you can do this in a couple of different ways. First, you can do what's called fine-tuning, which is where you take an existing app or existing model on ChatGPT, and then you actually give it a few examples of your own data, and you train it to say, hey, when you see a question like this, I want your answer to be like this. If you do this with enough pieces of data, it can start to learn about how you want it to behave, and you might not need to give it a piece of context every time you ask it a new question because it's already seen that and it's been trained. Now, I generally don't recommend people use fine-tuning for a couple of reasons. One, right now, it's only really available with ChatGPT 3. It's probably going to be released for 4 soon, but because it's on an older model, you're not going to get the performance that you would with a newer model. More importantly, though, I mentioned that you need to provide it a few examples. Well, few is actually relevant because really you need to provide it at least a couple of hundred examples of questions and answers that it can learn from. And it starts to get really good once you provide it a few thousand examples. Now, coming up with a few thousand examples for what it needs to learn from might be simple if you've got that data lying around and you've got the engineering team to do it, but it could also be very time consuming and it might require a lot of investment. And so what I generally recommend people to do instead is sort of provide the context for your question when you ask the question. So for example, if you're building an internal search engine, when somebody asks, hey, where's the document called XYZ, you can provide a list of all the documents that have a similar name and provide it to ChatGPT along with the user's question. And ChatGPT can make sense of all that data and provide the final answer. Or similarly, you might plug in something like a Google Drive folder and have it read all the documents in that folder. And then a user might ask about something, and maybe there were 5 or 6 paragraphs in one particular document in that drive that had the answer. You can then take those 6 paragraphs and provide it to ChatGPT with the user's question, and it can then provide the final answer. Now, in the scenario of what I just mentioned, you can't actually provide like a whole encyclopedia's worth of knowledge to ChatGPT. There's a limit on how many words you can send it at one time and how many words it can send back. It's a few thousand words. And so what you need to do is if you're building something like a question and answer bot or a search engine, you're going to need to save all of your documents into what's called a vector database. And the benefit of having a vector database is when a user asks a question or when you need to look up some information, the vector database will be able to give you the top 20 or 30 or 40 paragraphs from all the documents that you've provided that are likely to contain the information. So rather than taking every single document you've got and sending it over to ChatGPT, you can index your documents into a vector database and use that to provide a list of high probability documents or paragraphs that are going to contain your information. Now, when you do something like this, it's possible that you might have to make sure you're thinking about permissions properly. A lot of times you might have documents that are shared with one person but not another, and vector databases don't really keep track of that. What that means is when you're building an application, it's your job to make sure that any information that comes from a vector database actually is allowed to be seen by the person who's asking the question. This might mean that you have to build your own permissions management system, or it might mean you have to build a tool that can plug into your source systems like Google Drive and make sure that the person who's asking the question has access to the underlying documentation. All of this requires a pretty decent sized amount of work for engineering and a lot of time. And so before you go and build your own applications on top of this, you might want to see, hey, look, is there something out there that already exists? Or is this something that we really want to invest time into building ourselves? Each organization is going to determine what makes the most sense for them. But I wanted to provide a set of caveats or at least things to be aware of as you're building your own POC. There are a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of hype right now. So you might come across things that claim they can do certain things, but they actually can't. So just be careful, choose the right tool for the job. If you are building your own tool on top of ChatGPT's API, you're probably going to be surprised at how little data you can send it at any one time. These rate limits really sort of limit how often and how frequent you can send it information. So they're going to get you. But the cool thing about ChatGPT's API is it's really simple. You send in some text and you get back some text, which makes it easy to iterate quickly. And then finally, if you are doing this, you might come across this concept of prompt engineering, which is sort of important, but ultimately, if you're able to communicate clearly with a human, you can communicate clearly with an LLM. You just need to be able to provide very clear instructions on what it is you want, what's the contextual data you're giving it, and how you want its output to be. So you will need to spend a little bit of time on prompt engineering, but it's likely not the thing that's going to get you. Now, if you are building a software app on top of ChatGPT, you're going to need a real live architecture to do it. It's basically very similar to building any other piece of software. You're going to have infrastructure concerns. You're going to have databases and third-party tools. So while I recommend starting small with a POC, if you are building a large app or a full function autonomous agent or whatever it is on top of ChatGPT, just know that it does take a significant amount of time and resources. And that's just something that you should be prepared to invest in. You can always use a third-party tool like Locusive, where we're building our own internal search engines and our own apps, if you'd like, and it might be cheaper and faster for you to do that. But just know that these are all things that you have to think about as you're building an app on top of ChatGPT. So that's all I got for today. I really appreciate your time. I hope that this was interesting. And of course, if you've ever got any interest or questions about how any of this stuff works, please feel free to reach out. I am Shanif at locusive.com, and our website is locusive.com. So hopefully that was informative and useful, and I appreciate everyone's time here. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Otherwise, I hope everyone's got a great day ahead of them. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shanif, for a great presentation. Very much appreciated. A lot of really good content in here, and I know, like you said, it's only the beginning, so really excited. We do have two quick questions that came in. So the first one is, can you explain more about the smarter assistant and ways and maybe quick case studies as to how companies are using that today?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The assistant is almost like an individual assistant, but you can apply it to companies. So taking a step back, what do we think about when we think about a smarter assistant? It's one single software application that can do many different things. A lot of companies are using smart assistants right now to do things like ask a bot to join their meetings, record those meetings, send out a note, and then maybe even take the notes that are sent and send out a personalized email to all of the participants. You can think of this as something that's requiring multiple steps, right? A bot's got to know how to join your meeting. It's got to know how to record the transcription, or how to record it, how to transcribe it, and then how to send out notes. There's sort of 4 or 5 different, very different things that need to be done. This is an example of sort of an assistant, or what's called an autonomous agent. The idea is you build an app that's got access to different tools. Maybe one tool is a search engine, or maybe one tool is a voice to text transcriber, and maybe another tool is an email tool. So this app has access to all of them. And you use ChatGPT to help understand what tools you should run at any given time. So for example, you say, hey, right now my task is to record this meeting, send out meeting notes, and then send an email. Here are the list of tools that are available. ChatGPT, what tools should I run next? And it might say, well, you have to run your voice to text tool. And then you run that tool and you say, okay, this is what I got from that tool. What do I do next? And maybe it says, okay, now you have to run your email tool. So that's what we mean when we're talking about virtual assistants. This is a very, very early industry. And what I'm starting to see right now is that assistants are coming in to play more for individuals, like employees, who might want them to manage their calendars, or send an email, or post something on social media, rather than entire businesses. However, we are building a virtual assistant at Locusive, which lets businesses plug in any of their data sources like Salesforce or HubSpot or Google Drive, and it lets their employees ask questions. And then even after they ask questions, we're going to add support for doing things like creating a new record in Excel or Google Sheets, or sending an email to somebody saying, hey, here are the notes from this particular document. And so what we're going to start to see is, at least in the business use case, people building these assistants to do multi-step operations that they weren't able to do before. There's one tool right now that I'm kind of excited for. I don't remember it. It's a personal virtual assistant, but prime example is sort of what we're doing at Locusive, which is information retrieval assistants, and eventually assistants that can do things with your own data and write back to the sources. Hopefully that provided a high-level overview. Happy to dive deeper though, if we need to.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. So the other question that came in is more of a high-level question. So in terms of ChatGPT, obviously in its infancy, where do you see the next version and subsequent versions leading to the capabilities of this?
It's funny how fast this stuff is growing, right? So what's interesting is OpenAI has said they're not actively working on GPT-5, which is kind of interesting. But at the same time, it might not be a big deal, because what they've done is when they created GPT-4 from 3, they basically just used a lot more machines and created a much larger model. They were using a lot of the same techniques, and 4 does provide better answers. But you might wonder and say, well, if that's what they've been doing, what would they do with 5? So they're sort of paused on that right now. But where I think things are going to go is GPT-4 is going to start to have a lot more integrations and a lot more multimodal capabilities, or the ability to work with media files. Things like being able to plug in image generation, or text to voice, voice to text. I think that you're going to start to see OpenAI start to incorporate a lot of these up till now distinct models into a single model. But if you're just talking about GPT and the text-based capabilities, you can see how fast plugins are being developed. For example, recently Code Interpreter was launched, and Code Interpreter allows ChatGPT to run code. The way you use it is you might upload a file, or you might ask it to write some code and then actually execute it. It couldn't do this up until a few weeks ago. And so what we're starting to see is the ability for natural language, I think, to become what used to be the de facto interface for computers. I think it's sort of making a resurgence now, and you're going to start to see a lot of apps having natural language sort of text interfaces, and you're going to be able to start to kind of talk and work with a computer, kind of like you can in Star Trek, where you're just talking to a computer and it does everything for you. You're going to start to see this reasoning capability of ChatGPT come to the forefront. And so, like I said, the future is hard to predict, but at least in the near term, we're going to start to see it execute code. We're going to start to see a lot more plugins come into play. We're going to start to see a lot of these autonomous agents for different verticals or different use cases come to play. I think that's probably going to take the next 12 to 24 months. I don't know what's happening after that, or even what's going to happen during that time. But I suspect that we're going to start to see a lot of reasoning capabilities and multimodal and multi-image capabilities. So we'll see what happens. I'm excited, and hopefully you guys are excited too, because there's a lot of opportunities here.
Great. Well, again, I want to thank you, Shanif, for a great presentation. And I want to thank everyone for attending as well. And there's a lot here. Like you said, I feel like we're only scratching the surface. So thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.